Was the last time it was here?
Yes, yeah, they won't do that.
Flying up until 20 minutes before the flight starts. After the flight, that's classic way of waiting for the flight.
When cloud base is going up. Punch my way through.
Would you have to go with me?
Went out to all these little lots flying around, and she stopped at the airfield, and she became an engineer, so she was the first female ground aeronautical engineer in this country, and then she got a pilot's license. And it wasn't actually in between the two wars. There wasn't this only men fly or only women don't fly. There wasn't any of that. It was, like I said, you could afford it, and she had to work to afford it, so she was still the secretary, then she got a job as an engineer, so she paid for her lessons.
It may be that we have to return to that a little later on. In fact, we're just waiting for further word. We've just been told the Rafale is airborne now from Milton Hall. Four or 5 minutes, we've been told, for the start of the show from the French Air Force Rafale, an aircraft which comes from their operational conversion unit for the type, Escadron de Transformation Rafale 3-4, named Aquitaine. And this is indeed an omni-role fighter, as the French have dubbed it. It's replaced no fewer than 7 different platforms across both the French Air Force and Navy, in the air-to-air, the conventional air-to-ground, the reconnaissance, the anti-shipping, the nuclear strike, and the buddy-buddy refueling roles. They're long-serving MiG-21s, the last of their type, operational in Europe. And so, if slightly belatedly,
Is it more expensive? my gosh.
team, with the other aircraft being the Extreme Decathlon, but sadly that's currently unserviceable. Nonetheless, this is about to be a pretty stunning solo effort, and we can see it up high there to the right. He's just been told he can start his display. There it is, tipping in. So in then from the right to start his routine, we've got Phil Ansell with the Extreme Air XA42. Of the state of the modern competition and aerobatic display art. One of the small family of unlimited aerobatic aircraft developed by a German aerobatic pilot and engineer called Philipp Steinbach. They were originally known as the S-Bach family, and later as the Extreme Air XA41 and 42. This is the two-seat 42 version. It really does push the boundaries. 315 horsepower from the Lycoming IO540 engine, and G limitations of both plus and minus 10G. Lightweight carbon fibre airframe, almost as a matter of course for an aircraft in this class. Very, very crisp handling, a very high rate of roll. Privately owned charter airline based at Stansted, and if you think you recognise the colour scheme on this aircraft, you'd be right, it is that of Titan Airways. As the Yak 50 changes direction, in come the other three team members on the B-axis, straight towards us for the break. The Yak 18T, the one that went vertical there, showing us that aerobatic capability you certainly wouldn't expect from an aeroplane of that class. As they all exit, we're going to see the first of a couple of short solo displays during this routine from the Yak 50. This one of a number of interesting aeroplanes Dutchman Peter Kuipers has in his own fleet, alongside a Bell 47 helicopter and his very beautiful Beech D-17S Staggerwing, both of which we've seen displaying at Duxford in the past. Douglas DC6B. B25J Mitchell. All serves to make this DC6 a very special performer indeed. The design of the DC6 started 80 years ago in 1944, initially as a military project for the US Army Air Forces. Douglas transport to exceed cruise speed of 300 combi model with a cargo door, and then, like this one, the DC6B, an all-passenger version of that, with a slightly stretched fuselage. Again, there were domestic and trans-oceanic versions. And they could seat up to 89 people. And one real leap forward that was pioneered by the DC6 came in 1952 when Pan American used it to launch tourist-class transatlantic services. Prior to that, there were no affordable means of flying across the Atlantic. Pan American was the first carrier to make that happen, and it was thanks in no small part to this aeroplane, the DC6. Many other airlines flew them in their heyday. In Britain, British Eagle and Caledonian flew them. They were also famous being operated by Pan American in West Berlin during the Cold War, before the advent of the Boeing 727. And long after the first jet airliners arrived, DC6s with their very good operating economics were still favoured by many airlines. Service as the C-118, and to the US Navy initially the R-6D. It was then abandoned in Lusaka, but it and the last ever DC-6 built were acquired by Namibia Commercial Aviation. It operated them on charters, but then their era came to an end, and they could very well have been scrapped were it not for the intervention of Ziggy Angara, co-founder of the Flying Bulls. Beautiful sight, and the splendid sound of the four Pratt & Whitney double wasp 18-cylinder radial engines producing 2,400 horsepower each with methanol injection. This aircraft was delivered to the Flying Bulls base at Salzburg in July 2000. It was given a ground-up restoration, and it flew again in August 2004. It's been all over Europe since then on Red Bull business. Indeed, before coming here, it went to Llanbedr in Wales in order to give a pretty exciting flypast through the Mac Loop on Friday as part of a Red Bull-backed mountain biking event. The last airworthy DC6. And on the 6th of June 1944, B-25s attacked, for example, German troop concentrations and bridges across supply routes. Later, they went on to operate from 4 bases in France itself. This was one of the outstanding medium bombers of the war, used across pretty much all theatres. Its most famous operational exploit remains the so-called Doolittle raid against Tokyo and other Japanese cities in April 1942, led by Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle and involving 16 B-25s operating off the aircraft carrier USS Hornet for what was the war's first strike against mainland Japan. Its success in military terms was somewhat limited, but following the Pearl Harbor attacks a few months before, it was a significant morale boost for the US public. the best exponents of piston engine historics across Europe, Raimund Riedmann. The B25 was an amazingly tough airframe. It could take a lot of battle damage, and it was docile to fly, although its single-engine, low-speed characteristics could take a bit of getting used to. Officers and Air Force up until 1958 on electronic development and training duties. Wasn't removed from the boneyard at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, Arizona until 1977. It went through various private owners, but then it was ferried to Austria in 1997 for the Flying Bulls. 25,000 hours were spent on its rebuild. This is the incredibly highly polished result. It's fully civilianized. The gun turrets have been fared over, and you might be able to spot the little weather radar that's carried under one wing, which And meanwhile, going off the grass, we've got some aircraft from the Aircraft Restoration Company that aren't actually part of our show here, but are going off elsewhere. And into land after the Spitfire, the B25J Mitchell of the Flying Bulls, and its captain this weekend is Frederick Handelman. Now it's time for another chapter of the D-Day 80th anniversary story, namely the involvement of the Fleet Air Arm of the Royal Navy. Its fighters and artillery spotting aircraft were active over the D-Day beach as the torpedo bomber reconnaissance units only followed on a little while later. The key role of the Fleet Air Arm during the invasion is perhaps little understood in comparison with the RAF, for instance, but it definitely deserves representation. It was to protect the invasion fleet from U-boats that were coming out of ports in the Bay of Biscay in particular, and potentially entering the invasion area via the southwestern approaches. These operations were dubbed Channel Stop. They wanted to flood part of the southwestern approaches with air heat imported to Taranto and the sinking of the German battleship Bismarck, but it still had important functions to perform as late as D-Day. And that's why we see flying in across the airfield now the representation of one of the most famous combat biplanes of the Second World War from Navy wings at RNAS